I've had questions around how I organise my spice and whether or not there is a system, and there is. So I just wanted to go through this a little bit. So the reason I have Dubbers broken into category is because spices have function. It's not just about flavour. Spice has an aromatic profile and then it has a functional capacity. What I mean by a functional capacity is spice works in the pan in the same way that baking powder or different flours work in baking. So they facilitate a reaction. They create an end result of taste by inputting a structural quality into the dish. So although spice is used in small amounts, because of its chemistry, it has an incredible impact. And so understanding that impact is really where you get to a space in your cooking where you're able to ad-lib, where you're able to take one flavour out of one culture and implant it into another. So the first one here is salt. The capacity of salt is for communication and drive and articulation of spice sound. So what I mean by that is the mouth uses multiple functions to create flavour and taste. One of those is weight, there's texture, there's mouthfeel, there is the sound or the tonality of the aroma. What salt does in a masala blend is it essentially raises the volume on every other aromatic structure that's in the pan. And if the volume is raised, the communication's easier for the mouth to hear, and then the translation of food to flavour becomes a much smoother, easier, clearer process. And clear flavour is where you find deliciousness. So that's salt. The other category, this one in the middle here, is heat. So this is chilies and peppers. Now technically, chilies and peppers are slightly different category. They do offer a different style of heat, but just for the sake of efficacy, I always put them in the one. Chili is flame. It is an upward draft. So what chili does is it provides length to a dish. So salt drives this way, chili goes high. And height is a really prized commodity when it comes to dishes where you're using lots of complex spicing, because without height, there's too much commotion happening on the mid palate, and that becomes a really difficult, heavy flavour for the mouth to identify. And generally, it feels a little bit blunt and dull. And so to prevent food from being blunt or dull, a little bit of chili, not necessarily to provide heat, but to provide length. And that's another form of flavour articulation. So this one over here is bitter and astringent. So when I talk about bitter spice, the most common is fenugreek, turmeric, and this is fenugreek seed. So these three down the middle. So bitter spice is structural and it's elemental to creating beautiful flavour. So bitter spice in food works the same way that phenolic structure works in wine. So the way that phenolics support aroma in wine, bitter spice supports other aromatic structure in food. And that really matters when you're dealing with really all Eastern cuisines that use complex contrasting aromatic flavours in order to create a dish that has a lot of texture and a lot of length and like a sequence of flavour. So when you have a mouthful and you get a first hit of sweetness and then comes through the savoury, and then there's some heat and then a little bit of pungent strength at the back, and that kind of really whole, beautiful, rich mouthful. What bitter structure does, they provide a frame. So if I take all of my clothes out of the wardrobe and heap them on the middle of the floor, I can't see anything and it looks like a confused mess. But if I put a coat rack in my room and hang everything up, then I can see with clarity what's there. I can see there's a blue coat and a red hat and a yellow jacket and a purple scarf. And really that's what bitterness does when it comes to the marriage of aromatics in the mouth. So without bitter structure, the weight of all of the spice tends to collapse in a little bit of an unidentifiable mess in the mid of your palate. But put something like turmeric or fenugreek in there and suddenly you have this structural space where all of the other aroma can hang off, and then suddenly your mouth can see and identify flavour more easily. It's not a hard sell, essentially, for your sensory body to identify what it is that you're actually consuming. And then around the outside, I have what you would call astringent spice. So 2 types of mustard seed, bay leaf, and fresh garlic. Astringent spice is different. It's non-essential. So if salt drives this way, chili is length vertically, bitterness is structure for the whole palate. Astringent spice opens this space here. So astringent spice opens the gullet. Now, you don't always have to open this space. You don't always want to fill it with flavour. But when you're creating a dish that's dark and complex and delicious and sticky, the mouth has a finite capacity when it comes to aromatic identification. The only way to increase that capacity is to increase the space with which it has to relegate different aromatic components. So if I open up my gullet, I've got all of this space down here all of a sudden to fill with flavour that can be quite dark and have a lot of movement and be quite earthy, without disturbing all the intricacy of the flavour experience that's already occurring around here in my upper palate. So it's a lower palate facilitator. I tend to use astringent spice when I'm working with produce that's quite difficult to flavour and I need to drive more aromatic punch through that produce. So things like chicken, beef, which I don't cook a lot of, but when I do, I really want to break down the weight of that protein, and so that's when I'll use astringent spice to perform that function. So warm and acid. So warmth, when it comes to aromatic profiling, warm spice is the spice that makes you think of your grandmother, really. So it's things like cinnamon, cassia, ginger, ground cardamom, ground mace, maybe if your grandmother's Kashmiri, but you know, those really comfortable, warm, sweet spice flavours. And warm profiling in spice is really integral because that's the pleasure sphere. So that's the space where we find instant feelings of recognition and there's no challenge to that flavour. A little bit of challenge promotes intrigue and curiosity for the palate, and intrigue and curiosity is one of the ways to engage the sensory body in flavour identification. So that's really important. But equally as important is to have a home base to return to so that when flavours get too difficult or when flavour identification becomes challenging, your palate can always revert to a safe, welcome space. And without that safe, welcome space, the mouth just gets a bit overcome. So I guess the easiest way to explain that is if you've ever eaten something that's so foreign or dark or shadowed or heavy that you can appreciate that it's full of flavour, but there's not a lot of pleasure in the experience of eating it. So that's warm spice. And warm spice is round. Humans love circles because they signify completion, and completion is always very, very satisfying. So that round flavour profile is a frontal profile for the face, so the aroma will come out this way. Acidic spice, which is also pleasure, is different in that where if warm spice is comfortable, acidic spice is exciting. And exciting spice here is the easiest is Amchur, which is a dried green mango powder, and sumac, which is not Indian, but it's beautiful to use. So sumac is a berry and Amchur is a fruit. You could think about acidic spices being tamarind, pomegranate molasses. In a liquid form, it becomes lemon and lime. So what acidity does is essentially it's ore for the mouth, a rainbow through a dark sky. It captures attention. It's something that wakes up the palate with a bolt out of the blue, like oh my God, that was just incredible, that was beautiful. And having that punctuation in a dish, it stops things being too serious, which is always a nice way to approach life as well as to approach food. Acidic spice comes out here. It hits in the cheeks and it will suck in your cheeks here, but it exits out that way. So you've got salt here, you've got bitterness as your whole frame structure, you've got flame coming up, warmth coming out, and then the acidic spice, which sort of is putting a sharp point out through this part of the face as well. So you can feel that really when you're talking about flavour in this way, you're talking about it as a full sensory physical engagement, because we don't just experience taste as this thing here. The mouth isn't isolated. Flavour and taste is the result of the palate recognising weight, texture, sound, aroma, colour, and then translating that into an aromatic experience that then connects back to memory, it connects to emotion, whether it's familiar or it's unfamiliar, it connects to personal experience, and it connects to current state as well, how we're feeling when we're eating, what the season's like, what the day's like, the produce that we marry it with, and all of those things together are what collate to translate into flavour for every single mouthful. So it's a lot of work that the mouth conducts. So in that way, you want to be really generous in being clear about what you're saying to your mouth in terms of what you're preparing in your aromatic base structure. Because the clearer you are, the easier it is for your body to collate that information and give it back to you as a pleasurable experience. So earth spice. Earth spice I feel is fairly self-explanatory. Or maybe that's just me. But earth spice is spice that's generally seedy, so it might be a ground seed, but it has that sort of very gritty, earthy, soil-like character to varying degrees. So earth spices I have in here are fennel, aniseed, cumin seed, kalonji, nigella seed, coriander. Now, earth spice is an incredibly important function for two reasons. It's familiarity. So that familiar I've come home flavour, different to sweet warmth of cinnamon and ginger. It's more like walking in the front door and smelling the smells and immediately knowing where you are. Familiarity is incredibly important to the experience of deliciousness. If there's not something in the dish that's familiar to you, it becomes a little bit hard to provide context for the flavour. And when it comes to flavour, context is vital. If you can't place it, it's almost like you can't taste it. Also is that it provides weight for the mid-palate. So earth spice sits really heavily across this space here. And weight has an incredible important function when it comes to appetite, to feelings of fullness, and also to the experience and the connectivity of flavour. So if your mouth feels like it's had no food, it takes longer for your stomach to feel satisfied with whatever it is you've consumed. But also in terms of aromatic connectivity. So you've been on the journey with me in terms of understanding where flavour goes in the mouth. If you've got salt here and you've got chili here and you've got warm spice out here and acids over here, black peppers, which we didn't talk about, but they sit back here. And you've got all of these spaces where there is flavour interacting, but if they have no central channel to pass through, they won't create a cohesive whole in the mouth. So what happens then is you get this kind of donut space that's empty in the middle, and it becomes a less satisfying experience. It's that thing when you take a bite of something and the first few mouthfuls is interesting and it kind of just drops off and you don't know where it's gone. A lot of that has to do with connectivity and not providing it. So you've got to have spice in this central space. So the last one here is structural. So structural is spice that is used in a whole form. Structural spice is charisma. So it's the spotlight in the dish. You can blend all of these other spices quite effectively. Structural spice tends not to blend. It tends to stand as an exclamation point. You can't hide it. So structural spice stands as like a pillar in a house. It's going to be a beautiful point of attention And then what you want is you want the other spicing around it to be equally as engaging. So it's not just the pole that's getting your attention, it's the pole plus the architecture around it. That was a lot of information on those dubbers. So thank you. All right.